Hey everyone, thank you for watching. I'm happy to announce that there's been more and more views on the videos that are coming out, which is nice. Not necessarily the main reason I'm doing this. The main reason I'm doing this is to improve my own chess. Hopefully some of you are also going to get some improvement from this as well. But it's nice that there are more views coming out, so hopefully that trend will continue. In the meantime, let's just get straight into it. Time is limited, so what we want to do is solve as many possible puzzles as we can. And now here is a potential check we can start this session with. As you know, the goal of the puzzle streak, if you've watched them before, is to try and get to 50. And I'm really hoping that by the time I get nearer to a month or two from now, when the Canberra Chess Club Championship is on, that I'll be solving 50 puzzles in a row, at least once, but hopefully consistently. I think that'll put me in good stead. And what we're trying to do is also be very methodical with the way we try and solve puzzles. And we're going to look at checks first, all the checks, then all the captures, all the threats, until we find undoubtedly the best move. So with that in mind, what if we play Queen G7 check? It's definitely a checkmate, so you can't beat mate in one. Now we're up to move 2. Now straight away I can see a check, which is where we're going to start, and it's a nice check because it also forks the queen. Now it's going to be hard to come up with something better than that, so I don't see any other checks other than this one, but he simply takes, which is obviously not as good. There's no threats of mate, no other captures really to look at, so we can do that. In this scenario, it looks very nearly like a checkmate for both of us. I mean, he's got these 3 pieces lined up around our king, but we've got our queen and a couple of pawns towards his king. What can we do with it? Well, let's start with some checks. So what if we give this check here? If we give that check there, he's got 2 options. One is that he could play here, and one is he could play here. Let's go from left to right. Actually, let's go with what if he takes the pawn, because it's the more kind of forcing for us because we've given up material. If he does that, well then I suppose we've at least got this check to follow up with. And after that check, he would have to move the king. He would have to move the king either here or back where it came from. Then we could at least just take the bishop. And the beauty of taking that bishop is no matter where he has this discovery with this bishop, no matter where he goes, we'd be able to take the rook as well, and that'd be great for us. So because of that, after he does this, and we give the check, and he moves and we take the bishop, he probably has to move the rook somewhere. For instance, here. And then the question is, how do we follow up from there? Well, we can give another check if we want. I'm not sure that's making too much progress. We could also just move on with our lives and say that we've got this outside pass pawn, which is very nice. And that might be worthwhile. So essentially here we can trade a pawn for a bishop, and that's probably not bad. Because the alternative, if he doesn't take the pawn, is that he comes here. But then in that case we go check, and it's actually checkmate. So he will have to take this pawn. We can then give a check. And I'm not sure where he moves, but regardless of where he moves, we can take the bishop. And that's all there was to it. We had the nice outside pass pawn and good prospects there. Alright, so now this time we're white. Let's look at checks. As white, we've got a couple of them. Here's one, and it looks really nice because it forces the king here. It's the only possible square to go to. And then we can just come down and take the queen. And we're going to have 2 rooks versus this rook. We'll be able to take these other pawns, and we'll end up winning this game. Not really any necessity to move further through our calculations than that. Now here we've been checked, but also he's attacking the rook. So that's something. What we could do is take this bishop. When he takes our rook, we can take this rook. So that comes to mind, because in this scenario, we can't give a check because we're checked ourselves. We're checked ourselves. And if we just move the king out the way, well, that would be the only other option. Well, then he can take the rook. And then if we take the bishop, he can take the bishop, or if we take the rook, he can take the bishop. So I think it is better to take the bishop first, just, you know, on principle. Now we need to continue on. And I think we would do that by, you know, well, we can think now of checks, but unfortunately we can't give this check because we're pinned. So that's a shame, but it's true. There's no other checks. Thinking of captures, we could take this knight, or we could take the rook. And again, on the face of it, you're better off taking the rook, partly because the rook is worth more than the knight, and partly because if we take here, he's going to be able to take this. So again, just by principle, we have to take the bishop, take the rook. All right, now in this scenario, let's look for some checks. Here's one. That's a really nice one because it's actually a checkmate, so we don't need to look further. All right, in this scenario, we're white, so let's look for some checks. There's this check. Doesn't look great though, because he gets to take our queen, and after we take again check, he comes here taking the pawn, and then we're really out of luck. You know, we can give a check, but he simply takes. So don't think that's going to necessarily be it. There is also this check, however, and that looks a lot more appealing because it forces him to either one of these two squares. And if he chooses this square, then we just come here and mate him. So it actually forces him here. And once he's been forced there, we can come in with another check to finish the game. So that's a mate in two. Oh, he's gone the wrong, well, not really the wrong way because it's made in two regardless. All right, here we are again. Looking for checks first. So let's look at this check, which is really nice because it forces him here. Then we can take, and that will be a mate. So far so good here. Looking at checks first. After this check, he has basically two squares he can use. In either case, we then win a rook, which is nice. We've got to be careful that he doesn't have anything though, because he does have a lot of material around our king. So after we take that rook, what can he do? He could give a check here. That's a check, but we take. And when he takes back, we're not looking too bad. He would be protecting this pawn. But we could maybe just take this pawn and then look to bring the queen back. And even if we have to sacrifice, yeah, that would be an overwhelming advantage for us. So that looks really good. That looks really good. There is also this check. This check here is also possible. Then if he comes here, we do this check, he brings the rook back, and we're not actually making the same amount of progress. There's this check he takes, but what's the point in that? I don't see anything real reason to do that. We could maybe think about a move like this, but he simply takes with check, and he's probably going to mate us shortly after that. Why would we do that? So I'm happy to take a rook. All right, so here we've been checked and our queen is attacked. So it's very much, you know, we can't give a check yet, unfortunately, but it's very much forced that, you know, why would we just move the king away and let him take the queen? By principle, we kind of have to take. When he takes back, now the real question is, what do we do? If you'd like to move up here and attack the rook, you're wrong, because there's another move, which is a check. And it forks the rook, and it's going to let us have a lot of extra material in that endgame and an easy victory. Here we don't have any checks, as far as I can tell, but captures we do have. We could capture with either rook, and we would have to just decide which one is the better rook to capture with. If we capture with the G rook, we're threatening check, and then when he comes here, we're sort of out of ammunition in a way. If we capture with, that's if we capture with the E rook. If we capture with the G rook, well, then we're threatening check, and if he comes here, check, he's sort of we're sort of running out of options a little bit. So what about threats? Well, we could maybe come up with some threats. Like, what if we came here and threatened check? Well, then he comes here, we go check, he takes this. So this one's a little bit more difficult. On principle, I'd like to take the pawn rather than not take the pawn. However, even then, we've got 2 rooks and 2 pawns. He's got 2 rooks and 3 pawns, so it seems rather dangerous for us. I've realized now, though, however, that after we take with the e-pawn, it's not that we're threatening to come up here with check. The real threat there is to actually come here, and that would be checkmate. So if we take here, how does he actually prevent the rook from getting here with checkmate? Well, he wouldn't be able to move the king out of the way. He can move the king here. That doesn't help. We still give the checkmate. So the king is out of action. Completely out of action. Can he do anything with this rook? Well, no. It doesn't matter if he comes here or here. We're still giving that checkmate. He would have to actually make a move with this rook. And that move, well, it could be a check, but we simply take, and then we're still threatening the same thing. So I'm pretty much ready to play this move. He could maybe play something like this, so that after we give the check, he blocks with the rook, but then we take anyway, and it's still a mate. So I think this is mate regardless. All right, here we go. We've got a couple of checks. The most obvious is this one because it captures a rook. He would have to recapture with the queen, and then the queen actually defends this square. So another good check would be this. And that's a really nice check because it wins a pawn, checks the king into the corner by force, and then we can take the rook. And when he takes back, if he takes back with the queen, he drops the knight. So he would actually have to take back with the knight. But then in that case, we're able to deliver a mate. Can you see that? Let's see. So check. He moves to the corner. Now, if we take this and he takes with the knight, then these two combine to give a mate here because the knight will actually intercept the queen's defense of this. Whereas if after taking he takes with the queen, well, now the queen, although it defends against checkmate, he's given up on the knight, which, by the way, funnily enough, is also checkmate. So we take here and it's a mate guaranteed. We're up to 12. We're doing all right. Now here, that's tempting, but let's see. Do we have any checks? Actually, we don't have any checks. So yes, we can look at the captures. Perhaps I'm starting to do this subconsciously, but that would be a good thing. So if we take this pawn, it's nice because A, we've won a pawn, B, we're threatening a rook, and C, we're threatening a knight. So that's a really nice, option. What can he do in response? He can give a check, but we take, and when he takes back, we take a rook. We are also threatening a pawn, I should mention. So we're going to have a lot of extra material there. Can't really think of any reason why we wouldn't want to do that. So let's do it. All right, here we are again, looking for checks. I don't see any checks in this position at all. So now I'm looking on for captures. Captures, well, there's a couple. We could take this pawn, but he'd probably take back with the pawn rather than disconnecting his rooks. But either way, he'd be fine because this is not a nice move, I don't think. Another capture would be to take this, but let's say he takes with the rook there. What are we going to do? Just capture back, and we've given him an exchange for what purpose? I don't know. Maybe if we wanted to, we could go after something like this if we were then going to follow it up with this, which threatens a check, but after he just moves and threatens our knight has to sort of move again, and we've really gained nothing there as far as I can tell. So I don't think that's the move. So no threats, no checks, no captures. Well, there is also this capture. I don't see why we would do that. He can just take back with the knight. He could take with the queen, and I don't see what we've gained. I suppose if he takes with the knight, we can come here and put some nominal pressure on this pawn. But what if he takes with the queen? I don't think we've gained anything there. We've just disconnected our pawns for no particular reason. With all that said, we're on to the threats. And the biggest threat I see is that we could threaten the queen by playing knight b3. And that queen actually doesn't have any squares that are safe. So that's a really nice threat. A really nice threat of material. It's not so much a strategic threat as it is a tactical threat. I like that a lot because why not win a queen if you can? Let's not let the queen escape. Let's take. If he takes the rook, we'll actually take back. Here, we've got a check, but it doesn't make a lot of sense to give this check. He simply takes the queen, and what have we gained? I'd say nothing. There's no other... well, there is this check as well, actually. There is this check, so you've got to be always careful. If we do this check, he has to either move the king or take the bishop. Let's say he takes the bishop because we never want to just give away material for free. So let's assume he takes it as the most dangerous option. Well, then we can take a queen, which is nice. So we win a queen there. We're also still putting a lot of pressure on this fellow. Now, alternatively, we could start. And though this is a really nice option, the reason I'm continuing through and looking at some other captures is because there might be a better option here. Although this is nice, that we might have something better. And that is that we might be able to take this rook. If we take the rook and he takes with the pawn, then everything's fine because we can revert to the previous idea and also win the queen. I guess the problem is if we take the rook, he takes with the queen. And then all we've won is, an exchange, which is not as much as if we win a pawn and a queen for our bishop. So let's do that instead. Here there's no checks available at all, but this move, pawn f7, threatens, not only does it threaten the knight, threatens to become a queen. Now, of course, that queen, it's going to come with a check and require itself to be captured somehow. So we're threatening this knight. We're also threatening this rook. Also, if we do take, then there'll be a discovered check here. So this move comes to mind since there are no checks. But since this falls into the category of a threat, essentially, threatening a few things, we should actually only be coming to that later on. We should firstly be looking at captures. So what if we capture here? It's check. This would be a check. And this check would actually force him to, let's say, probably capture. Capture would be the most sensible response there. If he captures, we can then take this pawn. And having taken this pawn, we're also putting pressure on the knight. Okay. So that would be relatively nice. If the knight moves away, we can win yet another pawn, which is good. Whereas if he simply protects the knight, then we can double up with our rooks and continue on from there. So that looks nice. That actually looks really nice. We take a pawn. If the knight moves, we get to take another pawn. I think those things are in our favor, depending on the overall material advantage. So we've both got 2 rooks and 2 minor pieces at present. In terms of pawns, we've got 5, and he's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So even if we win these 2 pawns, 1, and let's say he moves away 2, even if that happens, the material is still only equal. So I don't love the capture, this is the only other capture which doesn't really make any sense. So I think now it is sensible to think about threatening moves. And I think the threat here is nice because there's 2 of them. One is against the knight and one is against the bishop. If the knight moves, well, then he drops this knight with check. And then we're going to get that's not really an option for him. If he moves the rook, as mentioned, well, it would have to be probably here, and then we take this knight anyway. And that's really good. So I think that's going to be the move. He takes with this. That's not a response that I'd considered, so that's, a demerit for myself. However, we can take the rook, which was one of the threats that was earlier foretold. We could also take this pawn, but why would we do that? Well, the reason we would do that is that if the rook tries to defend itself, maybe we could apply more pressure to the pinned knight, but we can't really do that. So I think here we're just going to take this. Would we want to take with a check first? If we take check, he comes here. We can give another check. He comes here to protect the rook. So I don't think there's any reason to give up this exchange. Let's just take the rook and maintain that pin for later use. In this case, we've got a couple of checks. I think this one is the more forcing because it actually also hits a couple of the white pieces and basically forces him to take with the queen. If he does that, the queen will lose track of the bishop and we'd be able to take the bishop. That gives me another idea. We could actually start by taking the bishop. So, those are the only checks in the position. Now we're looking at captures. If we start with taking the bishop and he takes our queen, then we can give a check and win the queen back. So it's just a full piece that we're going to win there. And he's going to lose his right to castle. And in the resulting position, we've both got 2 minor pieces and 2 rooks. We've got 2 extra pawns, he can't castle, we're winning in that. Very nice position. All right, here we go again. We are white, we're looking for our options, and we can see that we have a check available here, and that would force him off this back rank. He'd be forced forward. There's 2 squares he can move to in that context. And in fact, there's only 1 square he can move to in that context. Excuse me, I misspoke. Because he can't come here, we guard that square. So after rook b8 check, he's forced to g7. Then we can follow up with queen f8 check. And that really takes away all squares from the king, and that is a mate in 2. Okie doke, now we're black. We're black here. Now as black, our pawn is trying to come this way, which means this pawn is very nearly a queen. The only issue is that this rook stands in the way, defending. That if we ever got a queen, he'd take us, we'd take him, and he's going to continue trying to promote his own very far advanced pawn. So what do we do about this situation? It's hard to say, but since there's no checks and no captures, we have to come up with threats. And I think the real threat is we want to be able to threaten, promotion of a queen. I think the way we do that is by jumping our knight here to interfere with this rook. Okay, because then let's say he does nothing or even pushes this pawn. Well, then we get a queen with check. It's a big deal. He was going to have to come here then. And at that point in time, well, at least we have a queen. We can come here and prevent him from getting his queen at the very least. So that's really the thing we want to do. And if he takes, well, then we take, and then this pawn race is on. But again, we would get our queen first and then prevent him from getting his. We should be all good. So that's a really big threat. Now, when we're considering his responses, let's look at what sort of checks he has at his disposal. Because if he gives us a check, what do we do then? We don't want to step in front of our pawn here. And if we come, onto this file somewhere, let's say here or here, because we don't want to also block our promotion. We want our promotion to come with check. So let's say we come here or here. The issue is after we promote, we may no longer be able to get our queen back to the e file to prevent his pawn from promoting, unless we do use this square, leaving open this diagonal for the queen, which we eventually get. So just using those principles, we're going to have to play this move. And okay, he's moved that way. So now I would get a queen and then move the queen over here. So get the queen and move the queen over here. That was a good one. That was an interesting one. Now, in this position, there is a check, and it's good to always look at checks. Initially, you might not have looked at a check in a position like this because you might think it's too early to attack. I just need to castle, protect my rook. But no, you always got to look at them because this check forces a response from black. And once black deals with either of the moves highlighted, we can simply move over and win a queen. That's very hard to turn down. Is there any other capture that we would want to do? Well, we could capture this bishop. Looks like a free bishop, but then he captures this with check, then goes on to win even more material unless we give him a queen trade or, make our bishop much more passive. Threats, well, you know what? We've seen enough. Let's take the queen. Very nice. 20. We're up to 20 on the streak. Let's keep this going. We've got a check here. And that check's nice because it forces him onto the file that's about to open up with our rook sitting on it. And I think the best move for him here would be to come to this square, because otherwise this would be checkmate. Whereas from here he can actually it's actually checkmate anyway. So nothing more to calculate when you see a mate in 2. Sure, you could look for a mate in 1, but if you definitely have a mate in 2, you might as well go for it. Okie doke, let's move on. There's a check available to us here. And the nice thing is we can then double back and take the bishop off the board. And at that point, it's kind of nice that we've taken the bishop off the board, but we're left with a bishop and a queen versus a bishop and a rook. We do also have perhaps some extra pawns, temporarily at least. But let's see what happens after the check. After the check, he is actually forced to move here. And now I see that instead of taking the bishop in that scenario, we can actually then win the queen, and that's going to be really nice for us. Let's say he takes, we take back with check. If he comes back again, attacking our queen, well, we can maybe come here and, or even here to attack 2 pawns. If he pushes this forward, well, we can come here. We're going to get this pawn eventually, although it might be a little bit hard. Yeah, it's an interesting one. It actually really is an interesting one. Now, it may also be possible to start off, since I don't think this capture has much merit. He would simply take this pawn with a check and we're in big trouble. So looking at some threats, what if we instead threaten the queen immediately? If we threaten the queen immediately, right, I don't think he wants to take the bishop because we take him like this. It's a similar situation to before, but he can't advance this pawn anymore. We would simply take. If instead he moves the queen, let's say, I don't know, here, staying on this, file, then we can come over here with check. No, we can't. We miss out on the chance to play check. So this is really our best option. I don't think we're going to want to take this bishop. I think we're going to want to do this move instead. So just on principle, we're making progress. Here, I don't see any checks available at all. No checks. Now, captures wise, there's only one. Do we want to take this? Well, let's say he even just takes with his queen. What are we doing then? Taking the queen, he takes back, he's got a full rook, extra passed pawn. That is suicide from our perspective. Now, what about threats? Well, here's a threat. That's a nice threat too, because we're threatening the queen. And if he takes our rook, we take back, and we've got a queen that's still threatening checkmate. It's also playing against a rook and 2 pawns, so it's not going to be an easy endgame, but we are better, and that's nice. Another threat we could try is this, going for a checkmate, but it's not going to work, mostly because he takes there. So I think this is the best move we can come up with. Another threat we need to consider, though, is what if we play f4? f4, he can, let's say, simply drop back. And then when we play a move like this, he can play this, and we're no longer threatening mate. So I think we got to make the threat here while we can. We're up to 23. Now here, this looks like a beautiful square for the knight, forking absolutely everything. The only issue, and it's a check by the way, the only issue is that this knight guards the square, which raises the question, what if we take the knight? Well, if we take the knight, he takes back, and it's true, we've only won a knight and we've given up a queen. But after check and he moves the king, we win a queen back. So we've actually won a queen and a knight for our queen, which means we've won a full piece. Now, there are no other checks available in the position. In fact, this is actually a check as well, so that's why we need to consider it. There are no other checks in the position. There's really no other captures either, and no other pertinent threats. So I'm very much happy. Maybe we could threaten this. Maybe we could threaten this. But he takes this knight, we take this knight, is not as good. So we're going to take here. And now I think we're going to take here. Now, another option would be to take the rook off the board immediately. But we've already given up a queen, so we can't afford that. Let's take this queen. And we've just won a piece. So that's very nice. Now, in this scenario, I can sort of see already what the move is, but let's go through it. Checks. Well, there's this check. He takes us, and we've got nothing to show for it. There's no other checks. Captures, we can take the pawn, but he takes, and there's nothing to show for it. We're just down a full rook. This capture is possible. When he takes back, yeah, we can get the pawn, but he's got these extra pawns, and we're not going to be better in that scenario. But if we take with the rook, well, he still has to take back. Now we take back and it's a check. And when he moves the king, we win this as well. There, we're going to win the game. So we have to actually take with the rook here. Then we give a check, win the rook, and move on. Now we're halfway to the goal. That's 25 in this streak. Let's see if we can keep it going by looking at checks first and foremost. Here's a check. But let's say he just captures in one of 2 different ways. I don't think we've gained anything there at all. In the meantime, he's actually threatening a relatively nasty check himself. It wouldn't be the end of the world, but it certainly wouldn't be nice. Any other checks? Well, yes, there is this check as well, after which he can take with the queen. and then we can take him. He probably takes us, and I don't see how that's really necessarily good for us. So I don't think we've got any good checks. Don't think we've got any good checks available. So, captures, any other captures? Well, we could take this pawn, but what are we doing after this check, or even after this check? Well, I don't like the looks of this, to be honest. So, what else have we got? Any threats? Any threats that we can make? Well, in terms of threats, we could actually, there is another capture. Instead of just taking this pawn, we could take this pawn, which is both a capture and a threat to capture the queen. That's a nice move. Threatening to capture the queen. Now, let's say he takes the rook. Well, then this bishop drops back, pinning the queen. And no matter what he does next, we're going to win that queen. And we'll have a queen versus rook and bishop. We should be able to win this pawn. We've got this extra pawn. That's pretty good for us. So that's a really interesting move. If he does something else, like if he gives the check, well, obviously there we take. If he gives the check with the bishop, we move to the side. He's run out of checks there. He's going to have to deal with the reality. So I actually like that threat a lot. I don't see any real better moves. Maybe we could do this and say we're not afraid of the check. Or this check. But no, if we do this, the problem is he's got this check. And then after we move, he's got this check. And that's leading to mate real quick smart. So I think this is the best move. And it is. And then we're going to pin that queen and move on from there. Okay, so it's all becoming a little bit more difficult. Now in this scenario, yes, we have to consider the check first, although I don't think that's correct because he simply takes back with the knight. And then this knight is going to be hard to remove, even though we have this passed pawn. If we push it once, twice, the knight moves. Wait, how's that going to work? Let's have a look. So we take the rook, check. He has to take with the knight. We push this pawn forward. What he wants to do is use the knight to protect this queening square. Maybe he can even use his king. So if we push forward again, now the king's a bit too slow. The king's a bit too slow. But what if he moves the knight here? Now we can no longer advance. He's going to get the king over. He's going to actually, eventually, we're not making progress there, really. We're not. But if we take the knight, since there's no other checks, we need to consider other captures. If we take the knight, yeah, he takes our rook. But after he takes the rook, we push this pawn immediately. The rook can't get back on time. The king can't move in time. He'd have to move one of his pawns here, and we get a queen. Then we got a queen versus a rook. That's a winning endgame, so that's going to be the way to go. All right, here we are. We've got a couple of checks to consider here. Here is one of them. In fact, it's the only one other than this. I think let's consider this one first. He probably takes with the queen. I would think he probably takes with the queen there. And then we can give another check. He would have to take with this pawn. And I think there we're really out of ammunition. Out of ammunition. Although with maybe threatening the rook in some circumstances there. There is this check too, but let's say he just takes with the queen. If he takes with the queen, he's got so much more material than we do. So I don't like that. But what about this move? In terms of other captures, what if we capture the bishop? Really nice idea. Whether he takes with the pawn or whether he takes with the queen, we can then follow up with queen takes rook. So we've captured both, we've given up an exchange, but we've won a full rook. So that's really nice. Anything else? Any other threats? We could threaten the queen immediately. Now that queen can simply take us, however. Then we can take this with check. He takes to get out of losing the queen, but then we still take this. It's not as good though, it's just taking the bishop straight away. So no good checks. This is a good capture, which also threatens the queen. Any other sort of threats we want to consider here? Maybe just moving the rook away which is coming with it. Maybe we don't have to give up the exchange to make this happen. For instance, what if we come, I don't know, here, threatening this pawn? Seems a bit odd, but what would he actually be able to do there? Well, I guess there he's able to move the rook back and defend, give up just a pawn rather than giving up a rook. So I think we're going to take this and then take this. All right, we're at 28. They're getting noticeably harder, but we're going to use the same techniques to solve them. So thinking first about checks, this is a nice check which forces the opponent to come to g1, at which point there is this check, which forces the opponent to come to f1, at which point there is bishop g2, and that is mate, with this knight controlling this square and this square, the bishop controlling this square, and the rook holding the bishop in place. So that's just a mating sequence, no need to worry about it further. Very nice. Now, in this position, what checks have we got available? Here's one. He simply takes. I don't see what we've gained there, so I'm not too fond of it. I don't see any other checks at all, so we're on to captures, and we could capture this bishop. First and foremost, looks pretty nice. Looks pretty nice to do something along those lines. But he can then play check. We'd be forced to use our knight to defend, because if we defended with the rook, he would have checkmate. So we can calculate here. Take the bishop, he gives a check, we block with the knight. Then what? Then I think we're just doing fine. I think there we're sort of doing okay. He could maybe take our knight. We'd have to take with the king. But everything's pretty well defended. At the moment, the knight does... Oh, what's happened? At the moment, the knight does defend the b8 square. So if we take here and he gives the check, and we have to use our knight to come over to f8, then the queen actually would have an option to come down over here. And the queen and rook together would be making threats against the knight. But the knight is adequately defended by the rook and the king. We've still got our queen available as well. So I think we're just going to be an upper piece here. I think we can just simply afford to capture. Now we should look at any other threatening moves we may have at our disposal. Threats. What threats have we? Well, maybe we could play a move like this, which threatens to get a check in and a capture. It's not a great threat, not the most scary threat of all time. So no, I think we just take the piece. We have to defend like this. If he takes like that, again, we can't take with this because we don't want to get mated. So we take with this. Ooh, wait a minute. I'm scared. I'm scared because if we take like this, now he comes in, or we can escape. We just escape. But I didn't calculate this variation, so it's another demerit. You can see I'm starting to get a little bit shaky. In that I'm missing a couple things. I'm being right for the wrong reasons, unfortunately. Now here, there's a check, and it's a nice check, because if he takes, we can follow up with this check, then take the queen, then take the bishop at the very least. We've got lots of extra material. I'm not going further into it than that, because it's easy to see that that's correct. Here there's a check. It's quite nice. You might think you're going to win the queen, but keep in mind that once you give this check, the queen can actually take the bishop. The only issue then for black is that we can then take the rook with check, forcing the king back into a checkmating kind of a situation. So that's still really nice. Even if he takes with the queen, we go check. If he blocks with the queen, we take it. So this is looking great. What if he takes with the king? Well, if he takes with the king, well, then we can take this. But he takes this, and we actually end up in a relatively equal endgame. So I almost made a mistake there. Might actually be better to look at this check as well. Because if we take this check, we're threatening the queen. We've taken a rook. He's going to have to take like this. At which point we can play check. He'll have to take. We take this, and now we've just got a clean rook. That's a clean rook. So that's a better way of doing it. A much better way of doing it. All right, let's look at our checks. Here's a check and a capture at the same time. So we're gonna look at this one first. Let's say he takes. We then have this check, which forces him to move again, and we can capture this. He's gonna have to take, and then we can move up with our king. We have a very active king. We have a passed pawn, and it's absolutely a winning endgame there. I'm pretty sure. We'd have to actually calculate this to make sure there's not going to be some kind of trick like a zugzwang or something. But I think this is just going to be a winning endgame. So let's see if we can calculate this. Not going to use the arrows, but see if you follow along. Rook takes bishop. So rook takes e3, check. Let's say king takes rook, bishop g5, check. King d3, bishop takes d2, king takes d2, king takes d5, and then king to e3, king e5, at which point, if he plays something like king f3 or king d3, we'll be able to play either king f4 or king d4 and use the opposition to march up the board. But if we're in that position where our kings are on e5 and e3, whose turn was it to move in that position? We just need to find out. So let's go through the calculation again. Rook takes bishop, check. King takes rook. Bishop g5, check. King d3. Bishop takes rook. King takes bishop. King d5. King e3. King e5. What can he do there? He's got a couple of pawn moves, but we've got pawn moves as well. So it's his move. That's the main thing, is that it's his move. But our pawns here can cancel out his pawns. And I think these pawns will also cancel out these pawns. So that after he does whatever move he does, we can sort of copy. He does a move, we'll copy. He does a move, we'll copy. Until such a point as he runs out of a move, at which point he will have to play one of these moves. So it's a winning endgame. We can do it. It'd be interesting to play that one out against the computer, actually. So I might open a new tab for later, or even for right now. This is just going to be a quick side note. Let's try and finish this off against the computer if we can. Continue against the computer here. Computer's just thinking. All right, now I would take here. Hopefully I'm not going to make any big blunder. I would imagine the king's going to step forward. Fair enough. Fair enough. Now in this scenario, it's slightly different than if he had come here and then we followed him over. Do we want to come here straight away? I don't think so, because that allows his king in. I don't want to do that. What I might do is play this move straight away. If he does this, I can do this. And if he does this, I can do this. And we're going to eventually force him to run out of time. Apparently that was a blunder, but everything's still in my favor. So I don't see why I shouldn't take this pawn. Everything's still in my favor. So what's the issue? I don't see an issue here. I'm just going to play this. This is looking really easy now. Okay, computer can't decide if I'm making blunders or good moves. Yeah, I could take here. Absolutely. But I wonder if it would be more annoying for him if I actually don't take. So either way, it's winning. Either way, it's winning. Now I can come over here myself. And now I come here. He's going to go after the pawns. It's not going to matter. And here, well, many options. Start with a check. Give another check. And another check. And another check. And let's bring the king closer. We can take this. And now, okay, we get the point. We get the point. Let's keep going with the tactics streak, with the puzzle streak. Now, in this scenario where black to move, we've got a couple checks available. Here's the first, most obvious one. If he takes with the queen there, well, what are we doing? Because we just take back, and he's got a rook at the end of that. So, not sure I love that very much. But is there anything I'm missing there? I don't think so. So I don't love that check. We could take this check, but again, he takes, and he's just got a full rook at the end of all of those lines. So I don't love any of that. Other captures. Well, there's also this check, by the way. There's this check. None of them are good. There's this check. I don't think any of them have any sense at all. We could take this pawn, but he takes. None of the checks or captures seem to be making any sense. So what about threats? Here's a threat, actually. What's the threat associated? Well, the threat associated is to come here with a check. And when he moves, well, maybe not so much of a check. Not so much of a threat. Other possible threats. What can we do? We could come, well, we can't come there. We could maybe come here and threaten the pawn. Could we come here with the rook? That actually threatens checkmate. So this is the biggest threat we have, mate in one. You can't get a bigger threat than that. He can't put the queen anywhere here to defend against the mate threat. Nor can he push the pawn to make room for his king. He can block like this, but at the very least, that gives up the queen. So I don't think he wants to do that. I don't think there's really many ways for him to do this. There's no checks available to him. Doesn't matter if he threatens our queen in response. The mate's coming. The mate's coming, and I don't see any way for him to stop it. So we'll go for this. Okay, well, you can give the queen and the bishop to stay alive, and I'm happy to take them. Here's a check. He'll take this, however. So do we have anything, better? Well, we've got this check as well, but he probably takes like this. We've got just taking the rook, but then he's going to give a mate. So we've got to be careful about that checkmate. But thinking first and foremost about the checks we have, let's think a bit more closely about what happens after this. Check. He doesn't have to take the knight, but let's start with assuming that he will take the knight. Then we can follow up with this check. And let's assume he takes the pawn. At that point, there's not a lot of good looking moves. We can give him another pawn, which he can take. We can come back and give another check, and he moves over here. I don't see what we've gained. So I don't think this is necessarily the move. There is also this check. This check, though, now he is forced to take the knight, and then we can come here with a check. And that's actually a checkmate. So big difference between these two checks. In this case, he's winning material. He's running away with the king, and he's always threatening mate. In this case, we made him in two. All right, checks. Well, why don't we start looking with this check? Because if he moves over here, it's an immediate mate. So if we do play queen takes with check, he's forced here, at which point there's this check and this check still. Still both of these checks available. This would be the better one because after he moves, we can take a rook, and we're threatening check that would basically win a queen. So this is pretty hard to say no to. Check, check, and then taking a rook. Might not be completely best because he still has this check after all, and then possibly a mate to follow. So we've got to make sure we're actually mating him. What if we start with check this way? If we start with check this way, let's say he comes here. Well, then there's this check, which forces him back. And then we can basically come in with the queen again. So I don't think that's going to be as good as just coming in with the queen. Why muck around? So let's come in with the queen, and what can we come up with after this check? What can we come up with here? We do have this check available, forcing him over to here. And then we can give another check. It's a tough one. Check. What if after the check, there's no other captures I'm really interested in now? Can we now come up with a threat? And it's a nice threat because it sort of stops some of his threats. He can no longer start with this check because we would take. If he starts with this check, we can come here. And after that, we're still threatening to then play rook here to mow down his queen. So actually checking he moves here and maybe just moving the rook up here could be a really nice idea. Let's say he moves the queen here with check. I come here. Then it's his move. He still has to deal with this idea of check being a really big threat. I quite like that. I don't want to play the move yet because we are at 35. We're doing pretty well. We're closing in on 50. So I don't just want to throw it away. But after this and this, any other checks that make sense for me? Well, there is this check, don't forget. There is this check and just winning the rook. But like we said, if that happens, check forces rook g2, and then check is actually mate on the spot. So that's a poisoned rook if ever you've seen one. It's a poisoned rook. This is not a good idea. But check and he comes here, and we just elevate the rook here to the status of providing a threat. Really, it's not providing a threat now that I think about it. That's no threat at all, because he would simply take with check, and when we moved, he'd deliver the mate. So good that I'm taking a little bit of extra time here. But is there another threat that we can give? Is there another threat that we can give? It's a tough one. Maybe the first move is not a check. Maybe we're better off playing, or maybe it is this check after all. This check, basically, he can't step here, but he can step anywhere else. Can step anywhere else. I don't think he'd want to step here for the simple reason that we'd play this move. Check. He would, or even this move, probably. Check. He'd still be able to block with the queen. However, so even in that case that he walks here, even there he's looking basically fine. We could go check. And when he say blocks, or when he blocks like this, we go take, he takes, we take here, he takes here, he's got an extra rook. No, I don't like that. Even if he comes here, I still think he's a lot better. So I think in terms of checks, it's going to have to be this. In terms of captures, it would have to be this. In terms of threats, well, here the threat that we may have is unclear. Maybe we could threaten the queen directly, but then still check and mate. Maybe it's something a lot more obvious. Check would force him here. Then check, again, forces him here. Then there's this check, which forces him here. Then we can take this rook with check. And that's the key, it's with check. And he's kind of forced here or here. So we're making a little bit of progress. If he were to come here, we can keep checking him. If he comes here, then I can give this check. And then just come back and say we've done well. So on principle, it's the best move available. It's the best move available to play like I am. I think we give this check. Oh, yeah, we don't give this and let him start running away. We give the check immediately. so that we can then give this check. He can't run away. He has to give up the queen. That's the way to do it. So we give this check immediately. Then we come on with our rook. All right, very nice. Now there's this check, which is mate. Does this check achieve the same mate? I think it does. Whoop, I think there's two mates, basically. Two mates in this position. Got a couple of mates. One is this, protected by the queen. Check. He can't come anywhere up here. Can't come here because, again, the queen. Or we could use the queen protected by the rook. Can't come anywhere here. I think I prefer doing it with the rook. Nice, we're up to 36. That one maybe was not as tough as I made it out to be. It just took me a while to work it out, which is understandable. Here we've got a check. If he takes us, then we can play another check. I would love to see him take with one of these pieces, because then we could give this check. But again, it's not a mate as long as that king can just access the e2 square. It's not going to be a mate. So any other captures, well, we could give our queen away for free if we wanted to. That would be fine for him. No other captures that I can see. So we're onto threats, and I like the idea of maybe knight f4, threatening check, forcing him out to this place. But I still don't really see making a lot of progress there. At the very least, let's say he takes this rook. Right, we give check, he moves. What are we doing then? This bishop's defended. So it's not really a big threat. It's not really a big threat at all. What if we start with the check he takes, and then we come here to take away that e2 square? Now we're threatening mate. The problem is he can take the piece that we're threatening to give mate with. So it's slightly problematic. The other thing I noticed in the position is how possibly out of place his queen is. And it makes me wonder whether we can threaten that queen in a nice way. Maybe with a move like this. He can give a check. Then we come here, blocking the check. That queen really can't go anywhere at all. If he takes the rook, well, then we would have this move with our other knight to hit the queen. And now that queen would really be busted. It would have to give itself up for a knight, which we would then take. And we've gained a queen for a knight and a rook, which is probably a good idea. That's probably a good idea. Another way we could sort of do this would be like this to hit the queen. But now he just comes check. We come here. And actually I like that because doing this allows this rook to participate in the game. So after we do this and he gives check and we come here, we're now threatening the queen directly. If, so he doesn't have time to take the rook. Well, he could take the rook, but we take back, which is only meaning that we've lost an exchange. And in the meantime, the queen is still doomed. And the best it can do is give itself up for the rook. So I actually like that even more. I think this is the way to go. So let's do it. Cool. 37. We're approaching the target. Let's keep going. White to move. White to move. Now, endgame scenario. White to move. We've got no checks available. We've got no captures available, so we've got to go onto our threats. The biggest threat we have is to play b7, which itself sets up the threat of getting a queen. Not really maybe such a huge threat because, again, he's got a rook there defending that, making it basically an impossibility. So we need to come up with something else. What if we push this other pawn? Well, then he pushes his pawn and he's beating us to the punch. He gets his queen, we come here. Do we have time for this? It's an interesting question. I dare say no, we don't have time for that. Maybe we could just play something like this to put a stop to the advance of his h-pawn. It's not really a threat. It's more of a passive move, but it's possibly a positional threat. And the positional threat is that we're going to play rook h2 on the next move. Because what does he do? He can't take this pawn. And really moving the rook away is going to allow us, to really make some progress here. So if we've played rook c2, and how can he do anything here? Well, I don't think he can. Maybe he could come here to attack this pawn of ours. It's probably what he'd do. It's probably what he would do. But even then, if we come here and he takes this pawn, we might be able to just actually, in that case, push or even bring our rook back. So let's say this. Now our rook is the one that's on the b file, defending this. And if he starts pushing, well, then we can drop the rook back again. But if he gets the queen, we're going to have to take. He's going to come back to this file. Then at least we can give this check. That would force him here. Then we can give this check. We wouldn't force him there, but if he wants to come close to the action, it would. So I actually don't mind that. I don't mind that at all. This idea, he comes here. Maybe we come here. If he takes this pawn, we push. Then if he comes back at any point in time, we can take this pawn with a threat against the rook. That's quite... I think this is on the right track. So our threat is to come here. It's kind of a long-range threat. By playing this move, we threaten to come here. What's he going to do there? Does he want to push this pawn? Well, probably not. We simply take. That would give him another pass pawn, though. So it is something to consider what happens if he pushes this pawn. Maybe what we could do is this move in that case. Prevent him from pushing the pawn, and also threaten to take this with a check, and then return to our original plan. So I don't think that this should be a big problem for us because of this move. What about if he pushes the pawn immediately? Well, we take it. We take it off the board. No problem. What if he moves the king in to get closer? Well, if he moves the king in, it's possibly a good move. We can push this other pawn forward. We could maybe step our king forward ourselves. We can maybe push this pawn forward. Lots of good options. Now, this is a great puzzle because this is the kind of scenario I'm going to find myself in, for sure, in the Canberra Chess Club Championship, where it seems like it's a really sort of equal end game. You both have 3 pawns, you both have a rook, you both have king, obviously. But who's going to win is going to be based on who can distinguish between, this move versus this move versus this move, that sort of on the surface seem relatively similar. Again, I think if we play this move, he's going to just play h2 himself. And we can't get our queen because of the location of his rook. He can get a queen and we won't be able to stop it. We won't be able to stop it from happening. So I think we need to stop his threat first and foremost. Even if he brings his king in, at least then we can make progress with the pawn if we want. Now, if he then pushes this pawn, we no longer have this idea because he would take. It's no longer pinned. So we might have to take. He takes. And let's say we come here, he comes here. So it sort of looks like he's able to protect this pawn here. And that's really scary. We'd have to come back. He pushes the pawn. It's protected. So I think because of that, we don't have time to push this pawn after we play a move like this and he plays the king. We don't yet have time to push at b7. So after this and this, we need to do something else. We need to do something else. What is that something else? Is it to push this other pawn? Again, let's say he pushes this pawn. Well, we can keep pushing. That may well work. That may well work. So after this, if he brings the king down, which is only one possible option that we have to consider here, I think then pushing this pawn forward makes sense. If instead he brings the king here, well then pushing the pawn here makes even more sense, I would say. Because what's he going to do? Go back? We can push the pawn, make more progress. So yeah, I think after this and this, pushing the pawn is nice. And again, it's kind of like up to him. What do you want to do now? What do you want to do now? He might push this pawn, but if he ever does that, we can just take. Check, he takes back. And then we keep pushing. Now we've got two pawns here that are far advanced. And he's only got one rook available to defend. So I think this is the way to go. I'm going to give it a chance. I'm going to give it a go. Correct. So he's pushed the pawn immediately. So I think here I'm just going to take this pawn. So he kind of made that easy. And again, I'd like to practice this against the computer as important endgame practice. I guess the most important thing was that I did actually, well, we can just analyze what would have happened if he'd brought the king down. Yes, d5 is correct. Now it doesn't really matter what he does. The best move they say is to go back. We can start, advancing these pawns and we're just in a good position. So that was kind of really nice, a nice way to deconstruct that endgame position slowly and over time. Now here we've got 38 correct so far. Or this is the 38th puzzle, I should say. So let's just keep on going, see what we can do. No checks except for this, which just gives up a rook for no reason. Maybe not no reason, we would be able to take a knight afterwards, but in general, I'd rather not give up an exchange unless there's a good reason. Now, there's no other check available, but there are captures. This is the highest value capture that we have at our disposal. He would likely capture back, and then we can take this pawn. Then he can come behind our passed pawn, and he's going to basically win it unless our rook becomes very passive. So we could play this and this, and then push this pawn, knowing that we're defending the advance of his pawn already. If he comes back, say here, to prevent the pawn from getting further up, that'd be a massive mistake because a check. Forcing him to recapture, we take back, and we've got an unstoppable queenable pawn. So after take, and we push, maybe he wants to come here anyway. Maybe. But then we go check. He moves somewhere. We push this pawn one step closer. He pushes his pawn further. And it's hard to see how we make further advances there. So after take, and push, if he gets behind that pawn, maybe we bring our king close, but he can always just move away from our king. So we don't need to calculate further to know that the rook can stay on this file and sort of prevent us from getting here, it seems. Unless first we start with this move. If we start with this move straight away, it's not a capture, but it's a threat. And the threat is, as mentioned earlier, the threat is to play check. And if he takes, we take back, and we're going to get that. So if we play this, how does he deal with the threat? Does he move the knight back? Well, that doesn't help because check, he takes, we come here. He's still not able to defend the queening square. Even if he takes this, we just get a queen. So moving the knight is not going to be the move. Moving the rook, away only results in a similar position to that which we already have, except now he's worse off because we get to push the pawn closer. And ultimately, if he comes back to try and stop it, we'll take this. So this is going to be the move. He moves the knight. That doesn't help. Check. And take the bishop if you want. All right, that was good. That was good. Now, we're moving on. Let's see, starting with checks. We've got this check, but he takes with the pawn. And that's not very good for us. So that's the only check that we have available. Captures-wise, we could also consider this capture. But again, you could probably take with the rook in that case. and be just fine. In fact, he probably doesn't even need strictly to capture. He could probably push this pawn forward. And then we're in big trouble. Then we're in big trouble because we can't stop the queen from occurring. So don't think that's going to be it. On that note, there is this capture as well. That's a viable option here. There is also this capture. That's an interesting one because if he takes with the pawn, well, then we can take here. And after he does, maybe a move like this, we can push. And even if he gets behind, I think this is going to play an important role. So let's say take, he takes. What if we push immediately? Well, he pushes this. That's a problem. The moment this pawn gets pushed, it's a problem because we can't take it. It's defended by the rook, nor do we have the capacity to defend its queening square. So we can't really allow this. This might be passive. What if we play a move like this, threatening his rook? If he pushes forward now, well, we can take using our bishop. The threat to the rook still exists. And we've just taken a pawn, so that's nice. Where does he go? Well, he'd have to move somewhere, clearly. But why don't we just take the pawn straight away if what we want to do is take a pawn? Our bishop's nice. Why not just take the pawn? That's another, capture to consider. If we take the pawn, what is he going to do? These pawns are all blocked. They're all completely immobile. All of his pawns are completely immobile. So after we take, there's no threat of him getting a queen. He can't give this check because we take. So what does he do? Does he come here, threatening this pawn? Well, maybe. Doesn't seem like the most threatening thing of all time because we can play this move. But it might be hard for us to make progress there too. It might just become a shuffle, each side just shuffling around. That's a draw. There's no other way for us to defend this pawn, I don't think, at that point other than pushing it forward. Let's just say he rests his bishop here. What are we going to do? Oh no, he wouldn't be able to rest the bishop there because we would take the pawn. But let's just say, after take and he comes here, what if this, and let's say he just comes here, for example. Well, even if he stays where he is, might actually be good for us. Take, he comes here, we come here, and we're threatening this move. We're threatening this move, which would force the rook back. Take, take, push, push. And we're going to get a queen there. So actually this might lead to a really nice position. After this and this, the whole point is we're threatening this. And what can he do about that threat? Well, he can come here straight away. He can come here straight away. That's probably what he would do. And then, let's say we come here with our king threatening his bishop. Bishop's going to have to stay defending this pawn somehow. So let's say he comes here or here, here or here, here or here. That's, I think, when it becomes a bit of a shuffle game where we're not making progress. So is there something more to this capture? If he takes with the rook, again though, if we capture, it may even be okay just to do this. No, because we take. So he does have to capture. If he takes with the rook, then we can capture back. Again, still sort of looks drawish, to be honest, to me. Maybe it's not. If he takes with the pawn, I don't want to give up an exchange here. So this is a real struggle for me at the moment. If we take the pawn, I think the most threatening move he can do is to threaten to win that pawn immediately. I think that's the most threatening move he can do. And if I attack his rook straight away, he takes with check. I have to move away. Very, very tough position. This move to threaten the rook, it's a threaten. Let's say he pushes further. I take with check. So I am actually in time there. So maybe we start with this move, threatening the rook. The rook's got, in that case, nowhere good to go. So that's a really nice looking move. If he takes this, again, check. Yeah, that's got to be it. Take. All right, we got through it. We're into the 40s. We're kind of nearby. Kind of nearby approaching this target. Now we've got this check to consider. A very odd looking position straight out of the opening. You got to assume he's going to counteract you with a threat against your own queen. What are you doing there? I say nothing good. But what about this? This move threatens a rook, and there's no way really to defend that rook. So that looks like the correct move to me. Again, we've looked at the only check. There are no captures, so we're looking at threats. We're looking at threats here. And how does he deal with this threat? I don't think there's any way to deal with the threat. There's no check that he has. It's just a fair old rook there. Or at least a bishop. So, cool. Here we can give a check. Or we can give a check here. We could give a check here if we wanted, but that's got really the least sensible of all the options. This option, check he takes. I don't see the point. You know, I'd love to be able to go check, he takes, and then checkmate. But it's not checkmate because he can come back, unfortunately. We could come here, and that threatens checkmate. And if he takes, we go check. He has to come here. And then again, we don't have the final blow, unfortunately. So what else could we do? Maybe this. Does this threaten checkmate? Well, no, it threatens check. He comes here. And that's about all we can offer ourselves there. We could come here with our queen. And that would threaten checkmate. And checkmate here as well. In two anyway. So this comes with a big threat since there's no good checks, unfortunately. Almost good checks, but just not quite. And no good captures. We're looking at threats. And this is a big threat. You can't get a bigger threat than the threat of checkmate. So how does he deal with this threat of checkmate? He's got a check here, but that's nonsensical. We simply take the queen. He doesn't actually have any other checks available. Captures wise, well, nothing scary at all. So how does he actually deal with the threat? He can bring the rook back, but we can take that rook, knowing that if he captures back, we also capture back, and we've just got a full extra rook in the position. So that's not going to do it. I don't see how he does it. Can he give his king a square to go to so that after we come check, everything here is already taken? Maybe he can give himself this square. So if this, maybe he plays this. However, in that case, we can play check. And that forces him here. That forces him here. At which point, we can go check. He takes. Yeah, no, it can't be good for him. So I think this is going to be it. All right, we'll take the rook. All right, we're doing really nicely here. Really, really nicely. Got to keep it going though. So here we've got a check, but he takes. Here we've got a check, but he takes. And there's no sense in them. Captures wise, we capture a pawn, but let's start with the more high value piece. If we take this, he's going to take back. And that doesn't make sense either, There is also this check. There's this check too. If this check, I think we have to assume he's probably going to move the king, because there's no point in him just losing out on his bishop or his queen. After he deals with that check, if he comes here, then we've got a nice fork. And if he instead comes here, then we can mate him. And if he comes here, then we can go check, forcing him here, and then mate him anyway. So this is a beautiful move, essentially forcing us to win the game, unless he does give up the bishop. Should be an interesting idea, but we take the bishop. He can't take back if he pushes. That's good. We take the bishop with the pawn, though. I say with the pawn because if we take like this, check, he takes, we take. He's pushing this, and we can't stop it. Why allow that? Let's just have a nice position. All right, we're doing well. Check is available. If we play check, he can capture in one of two ways, and we don't have any follow-up there as far as I can tell. It's the only check in the position. So we can look at other captures like this, but again, he takes, we've got no follow-up. He takes no follow-up, and that's it for the checks and captures. So we're looking at threats. We could threaten the queen. He could take a pawn. We could take a pawn. What are we doing on this side of the board? Do we have any bigger threats, like threats of mate? Maybe we could play a move like this. Doesn't threaten mate immediately, but it threatens this. And that would threaten to just win a full rook. So that's kind of nice. How would he deal with the threat of this? He doesn't have a light squared bishop to deal with this possible square. He'd have to put his queen, which is currently on a dark square, onto a light square. Or he could maybe, he'd have to put it onto a light square. But then even then he's too late. Or he could maybe push his own pawn there. But if he pushes his own pawn there, we take it. Check. He has to take, and then we move back. Check. And then if he comes like this, we can come here with check and not win the bishop. So anyway, this is possibly an idea. How do we deal with it? If he plays this, we take. Check. He comes here. We come back. Check. If he uses this rook to come back, we can continue on pushing. And we're going to win that rook. If he uses the other rook to come back, well, we can continue pushing anyway. So I think that's actually it. There's no way for him to stop us from winning a rook there. If we win a rook, we're going to have basically, a great material advantage to be able to probably close out the game. But this is puzzle number 43, probably the closest we've been to getting to a full 50. So let's take a bit of time here and make sure we get this right. Any other threats? This queen threat, like we said, doesn't look particularly dangerous. Just gives him a couple of pawns potentially. Don't want to necessarily give him a couple of pawns. So what else have we? We could maybe bring a rook to the open file, but that doesn't really come with any particular threat. He can play then h4, and the whole idea we had of playing check, he comes here, we come here, it all dies. So I think we have to play h4. Okay, he's gone onto a light square. Not the light square that I anticipated, but a light square. But does it stop anything? Can't I just play this move anyway? This is a pinned rook. What's he planning? He wants to come here. That doesn't work. It doesn't help. He wants to come here. I still give the check. So I'm going to go forward with it. I could take this if I want, or I can give the check. It's kind of up to me at this point in time. I think I'm going to, let's look at both of them. Let's start with the check. This check forces him to take with the rook, at which point there's this check. He comes back with the rook. Whereas this check, he forced to take with the rook. Then we can take the queen, ruining his pawn structure. And we say we've got a better pawn structure and more material, and we should win the game. If we take this check, he takes like this. Check, he takes, and he's got more material. If we take this first and foremost, he takes back. Then we take, I guess it's the same, but it's less forceful. Let's be forceful. And two things. One is I'm running out of time in terms of disk space on my computer. So I need to end this video now anyway. And two is I need to go and, live the rest of my life. So even though we're at the 44th puzzle, so close to 50, I'm going to have to leave it here, and we'll come back next time and see if we can finish this streak. Thanks for watching.